the years, our grandparents told our fathers these stories, and they in turn passed them on to us when we were young. I pass them on to my children and to everyone who is willing to listen to the old tales of the people of this country. Tales of perilous pearl diving expeditions, long voyages out to sea. Some of the stories passed by my father and through the generations. In years gone by, families would live under one roof, with mothers, wives, sons, and children. All together, everyone would sit and eat as a group and share stories. Our job as a narrator is to preserve and transfer the knowledge that we have and traditions which were raised onto the young generation.
My story is that I come from a very humble family. My father's father was a merchant, and he himself was a merchant. He was illiterate, but was a self-taught person, and eventually he became an oil operator. I lived with my father. He passed away in 2014. One thing I learned from him was discipline, and I think he also taught us education was the only way for success in his life. My grandfather was a local medicine man, but he was also treating animals at the same time. He was well known and on the village committee. He was a kind person and a shy person. I used to go with him from time to time. He never said no to anybody. He had a touch. He was very generous, according to what I know. His house was open for everybody. They eat and stay for days. بالعافية.
بالعافية.
Like any old, closely knit tribal community, the UAE has its share of folktales and myths to serve different purposes. Traditional folktales are usually narrated by grandmothers who often gather their grandchildren and neighbors' children to tell them about the strange stories they heard and the people they knew in the past.
Baba Daria!
Baba Daria is a demon whose tales of horror and mischief are well known throughout UAE communities that lived by the sea, especially to seafarers, fishermen, and pearl divers. The name means
Father of the sea
in Persian, which denotes the origin of the myth. Baba Daria used to sneak onto ships in between the evening prayer and the call for dawn prayer. To snatch one of the sailors.
I would then devour the victim and sink the ship.
So, it became common practice to keep 2 or 3 sailors up at night to guard the ship. When one of them sighted or heard Baba Daria's voice, he would yell to his mates,
Oh no! It's the big, strong, and
No,
handsome.
that's not what they said at all. What they really said was Hatosef wal Jadum.
Which means, bring the sword and the axe. Where's the axe? The axe. We rehearsed this for weeks and we forgot the axe.
Can we do this later?
And the axe. Upon hearing the god's call, I would disappear.
The myth describes Baba Daria as
Tall, strong, and handsome.
and his facial features are never discernible, since he always appears in the dark.
does not know his past cannot make the best of his present and future, for it is from the past that we learn.
The town had a souk, shops, and the old neighborhood. And you could distinguish between the haves and the have-nots. You see, the haves, their houses are built by coral and mud, and their roofs are made out of date trees. But not the palace of the ruler, no. In front of the palace, I remember there was this big garden where we played football as children. Oh yes, and the British station, which was their air base back in 1935. And how can I forget? School teachers.
يلا يا طلابي.
They were good, and some of them were tough. You know, they even used to beat us. As there was an understanding that whatever the teacher said was correct, and the ones who succeeded became tough.
Snatch, kata, 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 snatch.
Kata is a frightening creature, which means snatcher, and is known as Hataf Rafi, the sea demon that assumes the shape of a sailboat. When it gets to land, it appears to people, especially young women, when they go at night alone on coastal areas. The demon swings a long rope to catch them as they start to run and call for help. Once, their call for help was heard by a man who came out of his house and grabbed the demon by a rope. The demon managed to run, but the man was strong enough to keep the rope. The demon returned and implored him to give it back. And the man did just this, on the terms that the demon never return again. And the demon never did come back. I was told this story by my grandmother, possibly to keep young women in the house.
A nation without the past is a nation without a present or a future. And thanks to God, our nation has a flourishing civilization, deep-rooted in this land for centuries. These roots will flourish and bloom in the glorious present of our nation and in its anticipated future.
Camels were called the ships of the desert because they were the only means of transport from one place to another. In the olden days, camels carried food, spices, silk, gold, and other trade items along the ancient trade routes. And the voyagers had no navigation instruments except for the stars. Bedouins have survived the harsh natural conditions. Bedouins shared food, and hospitality was at the forefront of their lives. After dinner, they would sit around the campfire and over some tea, talk about how the day passed by.
As a kid, we used to have firecrackers And we used to use them, you know. But when the firecrackers did not explode, we took the powder, which is part of the firecracker, and fire them again. I put the fire on this powder, and suddenly it catches on my face. And not having the proper doctor at the time, my mother did what she could do with my grandmother. We put eggs and flour to calm it down.
We used to go out every morning and we'd go together to the well near the old city. We used to go to each other's houses and we'd go together to the well called Outerwood. One night I heard a knock at my door, and when I went out I found a strange girl. I asked about her need, and she told me her colleagues had sent her to hasten me. I believed her because I was still under the influence of sleep. I went to fetch my water skin, and when I came back, I had some strange doubts about this girl. Her clothes were clean and elegant, but her eyes were like cat eyes and had suspicious and frightening looks. I told her to wait for me back at the house, as I had forgotten something important. I entered my house and closed the door tightly. I fled to my room. And she, under Wace, became aggressive. I ran away, and she stood there, banging at the door, crying for me to get out. But I was silent. She ripped the water skin. Can you imagine that? Tearing of thick water skin. And I thank God that I am still alive.
يا طير وظبتك بتدريب أبغي أصاوع بك هدادي لإطارا الربد المهاريب لذايرات من العوادي القفلهن عساه ما تخيب طير تقع ريشه عقب المصادي واللي سبق طيره بلا طيب بيتم في حزنه ينادي وبيتم في حزنه ينادي.
My great-grandfather, Muhammad al-Sayed, was one of the first people to be chosen to be a part of the advisory board, and he was specifically chosen by His Royal Highness Sheikh Zayed Al Nahyan, may he rest in peace. This was an honor to my family. Shortly after he passed, my grandfather Ali al-Sayed was then chosen to take his place. With that, my grandfather then established Al-Sayed Jewelry in the year 1965. My family business initially started as a pearl trade and traditional gold manufacturing jewelry business. It has now developed into being the address for the distinguished brands in the world of jewelry and watches. Following in his footsteps, my uncle Khalid al-Sayed was the chairman and founder of the Pearl Revival Committee. He was very hard-working and extremely talented, which caught the eyes of His Royal Highness Sheikh Zayed Al Nahyan, which led him to have a distinct testimony supporting him, where he quoted, إذا جاءكم لؤلؤ من أي مكان فاجعلوا خالد يرى ويفحصه, which means if a pearl comes to you from anywhere, let Khalid see it and examine it. As soon as the name Al-Fardan is mentioned, it is directly linked to pearls, jewels, and gold. My great-grandfather, Ibrahim Al-Fardan, was called the Doctor of Pearls, and he was the goldsmith of kings and rulers.
The old Gulf expats are the core of a whole society that has grown up together. They arrived way before paved roads, luxury hotels, and shopping malls. They fell in love with the customs, its people, and never left.
We still feel connected to something that we once helped build.
Memories are still very fresh for me.
The beauty of Abu Dhabi.
Coming from a 93-year-old who has been here for 35 years.
Is that you feel as if you're always moving, even if you're standing still.
Such is the dynamic nature of the city.
And indeed the country as a whole.